Just a quick follow-up to my last turn. As it turns out, you do need to play through until all strength points have been allocated. So essentially, I had to roll 3 more times, even though the Prussians had no strength points and no initiative points left. I had to use up the last of the French strength points to end the turn. So you have to deploy all of your strength points in order for the turn to end. So also, one other thing I did wrong, I had created the Army of the Loire here. You can't do that. I didn't even look at the counter at the time, but the Army of the Loire is not available until turn 5. Just like the general counters, the army counters also have a turn of entry number on them. Didn't even look at it, didn't even see it. I think I just read the rule in the rule book that said, oh, you can create armies whenever, just pay the points. But of course to do that you have to have armies available. The same way you have to have leaders available. So I've gone through, gotten all my leaders sorted out, and put them on the game turn track. The Prussian ones, I actually had sorted them out earlier. I just kind of left them sitting up there just to keep the game turn track from getting too crowded. But so I had to unwind the creation of the Army of the Loire. In theory, and this I didn't even think about until now, I should have gotten 2 command points and 2 initiative points back for the French. And I think I could actually, I know what I could do. So what I ended up doing at the start of this turn was moving the 3rd Corps. They were stuck up here, kind of isolated and in danger of being cut off. What I could do, it cost to move them and the 4th Cav, cost 2 CP, 2 IP. Let's just say I did that at the end of last turn and moved them out. That'll like retcon the French, the points that they should have gotten for the army that they weren't allowed to create. And that will give them back 2 initiative points and 2 secondary command, no, 2 tertiary command, no, that was secondary. 2 secondary command points back for the start of this turn that I can do something new with. That also would have allowed me to put a strength point back in to the 6th Cav, which I originally couldn't because up here they were cut off from the friendly rail line. These do not connect, and this was Prussian controlled, so that would allow me to use my free strength point to reinforce that Cav division. Okay, so retcon done, and we will now proceed with turn 3. Alright, actually I'm going to record this bit, even though I've moved mostly to recaps at this point of the turns. I did want to do a little detail of movement here. This is the Prussian activation on turn 3, the first Prussian impulse. They're going to move, secondary command is with the 2nd Army here, and so they're doing an Army with Attachments command, or action rather. And what I wanted to show was the potential where it becomes easier. It's become easier now for me to determine when or whether units can react. So my first plan on the first movement point of the 2nd Army movement was to move the 5th Cav, the 3rd Corps, and the Saxon 12th Corps into this hex here. I'm looking to cut this rail line, which was already cut essentially by the Cav unit, but occupying this rail line, and the rest of the 2nd Army is going to move down, trying to create a wedge between the Army of Alsace over here and the Army of the Rhine over here. And the Army of the Rhine is in a bad way, very reduced strength, even though the stack is huge. There's nothing in it. It's mostly Cav and the Napoleon. Actually, Napoleon III moved over to the Army of Alsace because it's now the largest army. But the problem with the Army of the Rhine is that the Third Corps, its largest corps, is isolated, stuck over here outside of the ZOI of the army itself. So I'm going to make it as difficult as possible for the Third Corps to get back there. I would have, during the resource phase, just attached the Third Corps to the Army of Alsace if I could, but at the time, they were stuck up here. In fact, actually, I can attach them now to the Army of Alsace because one of the things that I did in the first part of this video, I noted was that I had to retcon the creation of the Army of the Loire, which I did on turn 2 but couldn't. The Army of the Loire is not available until turn 5. So what this means is I went back and used the extra 2 command, 2 initiative points that I got from creating the Army of the Loire, which I wasn't allowed to do. I took that and retconned it and allowed these guys to move down here closer. They couldn't have moved over to rejoin here. It was too far. So they moved down here just to kind of create at least a line here. But what I could have done, since that was technically something that would have happened last turn, they would now be within the ZOI of the Army of Alsace, I think. Yeah, because that's not a forest hex. That's not a forest hex, so it would go 1, 2 to there. So they actually could, the Third Corps now could be attached to the Army of Alsace. So I'm going to make that change. And that will help the French out a lot, I think, just in terms of command and control. So we'll take the Third Corps and slide it over here. Because one of the first things that I did on this turn already was to move Napoleon III over to the Army of Alsace, which is now the largest army. So I don't start getting hit with those French VP penalties for not having him with the largest army. But I think it's not really going to change my planned move for the Prussians, which is to kind of insert some corps between these two armies, the French armies, and get them isolated. So for that first movement point, it's going to cost this stack of guys here a movement point to move into that space. So we'll kind of set them there for the moment, because these guys are going to have a chance. Well, that's the thing. That's the whole reason I wanted to show this video, was that these guys, in theory, have a chance to react here. In practice, I don't believe they do, because we can look at our reaction modifiers, because you're dealing with a forest hex side and a minor river. So forest hex side's a -1, minor river's a -1. You're looking at a -2 DRM. There's no pluses there. Actually, I think there's a plus because it's in a friendly Cav ZOI, so that's a +1. So you're looking at -1. But the rule, or the Third Corps reaction capability, or the Army of Alsace reaction capability, take your pick, is a 5. Yeah, we do have a friendly Cav, so that gives that +1 DRM. So that means that these guys have to roll a 6, but it's going to cost them more than 1 movement point to move in there, which means they can't. So no reaction is possible. So looking here at 5th Corps, or not 5th Corps, but the 3rd Corps and 4th Cav, even if they wanted to react into this hex, they couldn't. So they could roll for it, but there's no way that they could get more than a 1 movement point reaction, and it would cost them 3 movement points to move into that hex, because you're crossing a minor river and a forest hex side. So it's one of the things that I'm getting better at seeing in the game, is that there's actually, until you get, let me zoom out here, until you get into these really open hexes in the middle of France here, you're not going to be reacting over here in these forests and rough areas. Even if somebody has a 4 for the reaction rating, you're going to have so many modifiers that there's no way you're going to get the 2+ movement points that you need. Most of these hexes are going to be 3 to move in. So, what initially seemed very daunting, like, oh my god, I'm going to have to figure out so many reactions every turn. There's really going to be very little reacting, just because it's not going to be possible, and you'll be able to evaluate pretty quickly. Like if there's anything more than 1 modifier's worth of terrain that somebody has to move through to react, they're just not going to be able to do it. You would have to have like a 2 or a 3 reaction rating in order to react through any kind of terrain, really. So something to ponder there, but I just wanted to kind of do a little quick rundown of that. I'll be back for a turn 3 recap. Another little sort of mid turn 3 update here. I did roll doubles on the and not the number on the command table use track, so we added more command points, which is kind of bad for the French because the French are kind of screwed right now. I probably paid a little too much effort to try and invade Germany here, or in this case Baden. I did take Freiburg. That was worth 5 victory points. But the Germans were able to move guys in corps in from the off-map box, and we ended up fighting down here near Freiburg. Now the French 6th and 7th Corps ended up winning that. Both sides were demoralized. Were actually double demoralized because they were both out of combat supply at the time. Because after my Prussian corps moved down here to try and liberate Freiburg, the 12th Corps moved across the river and cut their supply up here at this rail line. So they were both, but the Prussian corps cut the French supply across the pontoon bridge here by being in this hex. So they were both out of combat supply, so they both ended up demoralized regardless, but they also both inflicted D3 damage on them. It ended up being a French victory by virtue of defender is the victor if no other conditions are met, and none of them were because everything was even. So the French technically won. They both rolled high on the battle impact chart, so these guys were able to retreat 3 hexes away. The French were able to pursue for 3 hexes. I ended up advancing them 1 hex, just so they could secure their supply line across the pontoon bridge here. These guys are still out of supply, but now they've put the 12th Corps out of supply by virtue of their retreat. So, not sure what I'm going to do with them. They can't really attack by themselves. I guess the army of Alsace could try and attack across the bridge here. The problem is, this is the situation for the French over in the west. They're holed up in, the Army of the Rhine is holed up in Metz. It's got about, 6 strength points and some cav. And it's got 2 giant Prussian armies, particularly the Prussian Third Army, or Second Army, my bad. The Second Army is massive. The only thing that the French have going for them at the moment is that the Second Army is actually kind of split up. Some of it is over here, having recently just fought and shattered the French Fifth Corps. Fortunately for the French, or kind of importantly for the French, he was able to retreat 3 hexes away. So I retreated him down here to the fortress, or the fort at Schlettstadt, which sounds German, but it's in France. Retreated him back here, was able to remove his demoralization, and the following impulse, the French won the initiative, and I was able to shuttle in some far-flung to rail in some far-flung strength points to reinforce this 5th Corps. So that's good for the Army of Alsace, which is right here. And the Army of Alsace is pretty strong. I moved Napoleon III over here so that he's with the largest army because the Army of the Rhine has been so whittled down through fighting that it's no longer the largest army, so I don't want to get that penalty for not having Napoleon III there. And it's probably better anyway because Metz is going to get sieged and it's probably going to fall. There's not a whole lot I can do about it. In theory, I could just charge the Prussians past and move through the completely empty interior straight to Paris. But I want to destroy that army in Metz and capture the fortress, and then they can just march in and take Verdun. Unless I can muster up some French strength points to get in there. The problem is the French really don't have any strength points left over here. The ones that I was able to move in and reinforce the French Corps with were from Paris. And Paris has a lot of strength points of reserve infantry, and that's probably going to get shuttled over to Metz. The Prussians aren't quite ready to move in there and siege it yet because I want to bring the siege guns up. So the French will probably shuttle some reserve infantry in there. Problem is up here, as you can see on the, I've started like Callendale. I've started adding I'm tracking the strength points on the rail track instead of over here in the already too crowded general records track. So, but as you can see, the French, all they have left are Paris infantry points, which is good. That's regular infantry as opposed to reserve infantry. What's not so good is that I got to spend rail points to bring those guys out of Paris and join up with the armies at the front. And I'm already maxing out on my French rail use for this turn, so it's going to start costing victory points. But the bigger problem is the Prussians have a lot of strength points that they need to bring on yet. And they don't really need to bring any of them on. They've taken some damage. Some of their corps here in the First Army have taken hits. They've got some demoralized corps over here, but these corps can sit here demoralized. These demoralized corps are not in any danger of being attacked by the French because the French don't have the numbers to bear on them. These guys are probably in the biggest danger of being attacked. But again, that doesn't really get the French anything if they attack there. Just because the Germans still have off-map units they can bring on. There's another corps I just brought on up here into Freiburg. He'll come down and act as a buffer and prevent any sort of French adventurism into the German heartland for these cities. If the French can run a corps over there and grab this stuff, they can get victory points for it. Or they could start messing with supply. But the Prussians just have their armies are just too big. These are, like these corps here, these are all fresh corps, haven't been touched. All I've got is a cav division there. Everything else is huddled up here in Strasbourg. There's another entire army here with more fresh corps. So the French are just massively, massively outgunned and outnumbered here. And not a whole lot. I'm sort of out of ideas. They're kind of hunkered down. It's turning into very historically what the Franco-Prussian War was like, that the French just got separated, isolated, surrounded, destroyed, and then the Prussians just advanced on Paris. And that looks like that's what's going to happen here. I don't have a good way of stopping it at the moment. I can pull these guys back across the river, but they really need to start looking at their situation here, because the Prussians can end up cutting their supply if they can get around them and again isolate them. So, the collapse of the French left here is, I think, really going to leave me with little choice but to start moving all of these guys back. Right now the problem is, how do I get the 12th Corps out of there? Yeah, there's a couple of demoralized Prussian corps there, but aside from attacking across a major river with the Army of Alsace, I don't have a good way of getting those guys broken out of there. I can move the 6th Corps up there, But that leaves their supply across the pontoon bridge here in danger of being cut by these loose Prussian strength points that I was never able to eliminate outside Freiburg. So it's a very difficult position. Even though, you know, the French are threatening the German border here, they're still in a difficult spot because they've got this massive Prussian right hitting the French left up here, which is just three basically full-strength armies about ready to just drop the hammer and take the fortress at Metz and just advance on Paris. So my plan for the French is I've just started drinking. What are you going to do?